Sometimes what destroys you doesn't scream, it whispers. I never imagined I'd meet someone like Liam at a conference. It was a 3-day event for business leaders and managers in the field of tech innovation, held at a fancy hotel in Chicago. I wasn't any kind of leader, just a coordinator trying to find her footing in a new role. But I was invited at the last minute to represent my team. On the first night, there was an informal dinner for the participants. I sat at one of the more discreet tables with a barely touched plate of salad, feeling out of place among so many experienced professionals. That's when he appeared, tall, elegant, with a serene smile and eyes that scanned you without you even noticing. Liam seemed to own the room more than anyone else. He sat next to me like it was the most natural thing in the world and started a conversation as if we already knew each other. "You look a bit bored, or are you just the kind who watches everything in silence?" he asked, with a half smile, holding a glass of wine. I chuckled awkwardly and said something about being new at the company. He listened like someone who listens with their eyes too. And me, someone who never trusted easily, felt strangely comfortable with that charismatic stranger. During the dinner, he made a point to include me in the conversations, introducing me as someone brilliant and promising, even though he didn't know anything about my work. At the end of the night, he handed me a business card and said, "You have a different kind of energy. If you'd like to talk more, I'll be around for the next few days." We met 2 more times during the conference. He always appeared as if it were a coincidence, but I later found out he had been tracking where I would be. We had lunch together on the second day, and that night, he invited me for coffee in the hotel lounge. There, he opened up about his life, said he had just left a relationship with an unstable woman and was now looking for something real. He told me I seemed to have a rare calmness, an emotional maturity he admired. I was flattered. No one had ever described me like that before. The way he watched me made me feel like I was the only one in the room. And on the last day, we exchanged contact information, and he promised he'd stay in touch, even though he lived in another city. And he kept that promise. Liam started messaging me every day. Things like, "I dreamed of you," "This song reminded me of our dinner," or "I wish your smile was here right now." And I, needy, insecure, and freshly out of a superficial relationship, fell for it. We met a few more times in the following weeks. He came to my city, organized romantic dates, sent flowers to my workplace with poetic notes, and complimented me on everything: my voice, my laugh, my posture, my gaze. It felt like I was living in a movie. But with time, the script changed. The first comments came around the 3rd week we were seeing each other. "You're so beautiful, but you don't need all that makeup. I love your style, but I think some of your clothes don't match your essence as a mature woman. You're so smart. You should be more careful about who you associate with. Some friendships bring you down." He never said these things as direct criticisms, always with a soft, careful tone. It made it seem like he was just helping me become the best version of myself. And I wanted so badly to please that I started to accept it. I started changing. Little things. I swapped colorful clothes for neutral tones, avoided hanging out with friends he didn't vibe with, cut back on makeup, even got a haircut because he said he loved women who looked more natural and elegant. Then came the emotional tests. One day, I made a light comment about his work in a group of friends, something silly like "Liam's always on his phone. He probably dreams about emails." Everyone laughed. He stayed silent. After that, he ignored me for 2 days. When he finally replied, he said, "I've been wondering if you truly admire me. Sometimes I think you have trouble recognizing other people's efforts." I apologized, even though I didn't fully understand what I had done wrong. And he followed up with a compliment. "You're a rare woman. You just need to be more careful with certain behaviors, but I know you'll improve." At the time, I thought he was teaching me something. Today I see it was conditioning. He was shaping me with small retaliations disguised as advice. And when I obeyed, he rewarded me with affection. It was a silent cycle of manipulation. In the beginning, he said I was the woman of his dreams. But soon, I began to notice a subtle decline in those compliments. They became scarce, conditional, and only appeared when I did exactly what he wanted. Liam never yelled at me. He didn't cheat. He didn't hit me. But slowly, he began to rewrite me, and I started to disappear from myself. He never had to yell at me. His silence was much louder. When you think of abuse, you expect shouting. You expect drama. You expect visible stress, obvious signs. But with Liam, there was none of that. He hurt me with absence, with calculated distance, with painfully orchestrated silence. It was as if he knew exactly what made me implode on the inside, and used it as a form of control. It started with the pauses, moments when he emotionally shut down. We would be talking normally and suddenly he'd go cold. The smile would vanish. His eyes would harden. He would start answering with one-word replies. I'd ask, "Is something wrong?" And he'd reply, "Nothing." But his tone said otherwise. His body said otherwise. The entire atmosphere would shift. If I pressed further, he'd sigh with forced patience. "You're always dramatizing everything. I'm just being quiet." So I learned that asking too many questions created distance, and I stopped asking. He created this subtle game. He'd withdraw, go quiet, make me feel insecure, and when I pulled back, he'd come back being affectionate. It was an emotional push and pull, and I was the toy. Over time, the silences became unspoken punishments. If I disagreed with him, even with reasonable arguments, he would emotionally disappear for days. One time I suggested we try couples therapy. I told him I was feeling anxious, like I was always walking on eggshells. I didn't use harsh words. I didn't accuse him of anything. I just gently suggested we speak to a neutral third party. He listened in silence, said nothing. The next day, he sent me a cold message. "I think you need to take care of your mental health before trying to fix anyone else's." It felt like a gunshot, because by that point, I was already so emotionally fragile that I started believing maybe something was wrong with me. I started researching articles about borderline personality disorder, anxiety, emotional dependency, anything to try to understand what was wrong with me. And he subtly fed that doubt. And if I cried in front of him, he would say, "You really should get help. I try so hard to make you feel secure, and you're always in crisis." But did he really make me feel secure? The answer was no. But I no longer trusted my own perception, and that was exactly his plan. It was as if he created chaos, and then blamed my emotional instability for it. Another defining moment was when he took me to a work party, a small event in the garden of a luxurious house, and I was nervous. I spent hours choosing what to wear. He didn't even compliment me. During the party, I was quiet, and he was distant, chatting cheerfully with others, barely acknowledging me. One of his colleagues asked me if I was okay. I smiled and said I was fine. When we got back to the car, he was serious. I turned on the radio. He turned it off. Then he said, "Do you have any idea how cold you were today? You almost embarrassed me. You acted like you were there out of obligation." I tried to explain that I was just nervous, but he didn't want to hear it. He stayed silent the whole way home, slept facing the opposite side without even saying goodnight. The next day, he acted like nothing had happened, and that was the pattern. Silence as punishment, returning to normal as a reward. That cycle destroyed me. I started developing physical symptoms. I lost weight, had migraine attacks. I woke up with my jaw clenched from grinding my teeth at night. At work, I began making mistakes on simple tasks. My coworkers noticed how apathetic I'd become. but I always said I was just tired. My friends invited me out and I declined. One of them wrote to me, "I feel like you're fading away. I don't know what's going on, but I miss your light." I cried when I read that, but I couldn't reply because I missed myself too. I just didn't know how to come back. I started apologizing for everything. If he was in a bad mood, I thought it was my fault. If he went silent, I tried to guess what I'd done wrong. If he took too long to reply to messages, I wondered if I had been too invasive, talked too much, was being too clingy. I lived in a constant state of alert, as if every word could trigger an invisible bomb. The cruelest part? From the outside, everything looked perfect. He was polite to my parents, complimented my cooking when we had guests, helped around the house, and in public, he always said, "This woman is my rock, my peace." But in private, he was my storm. I remember a day I decided to express my frustration. I tried to have a mature conversation, using terms I'd learned in therapy, which I had started in secret, afraid he'd mock my decision. I said to him, "Sometimes I feel like I'm always trying to please you, and still, it's never enough." He smiled, a cynical, almost condescending smile, and said, "That's all in your head. I think you create problems just to feel alive. Have you always been like this?" That sentence hit me like a blow. I started wondering, is that true? Am I being dramatic? Am I seeing problems where there are none? And that's the power of emotional manipulation. He didn't need to lock me in a room. He locked me inside myself. I became my own warden. I convinced myself I was crazy, difficult, too much, overly intense. And when I started silencing myself, he thought he had won. Because that's what the narcissist wants, for you to doubt yourself and depend on his validation to exist. And I was almost there. It wasn't just fear of saying the wrong thing, it was fear of existing the wrong way. Over time, I realized I was living by an unspoken rule. Don't disturb his balance. No matter what I said, there was always the risk of triggering disdain, silence, or coldness. I started mentally reviewing every sentence before saying it out loud. I became my own censor. It was as if there was a court inside my head, judging every word. And worse, the judge looked more and more like Liam. I remember once we were watching a documentary about social inequality. Instinctively, I commented, "Sometimes I feel so powerless facing these realities. I wish I could do more." He replied, "You always have this habit of romanticizing everything. You talk like the world depends on you to change. That's narcissism disguised as empathy." It was like a sharp blade. He turned my sensitivity into a moral flaw, and I began to hate myself for being who I was. After that, I avoided expressing any opinion on serious topics. Another time, I mentioned a book I was reading about childhood trauma and how it shapes our relationship patterns. He listened silently, watching me with that gaze that pierced your soul. When I finished, he just said, "It's funny you talk about trauma. You speak as if you're the victim of everything. Have you ever thought maybe you repeat this story so much because you need to justify your behaviors? Maybe you have more control over this than you think." I was left speechless. That night, I lay in bed with a lump in my throat. I spent hours wondering if I was an unconscious manipulator, if somehow I was using my life story as an excuse. The doubt grew like a weed. Gradually, I started to silence myself instinctively. A coworker complimented me in a meeting, and I smiled but didn't tell him. I was afraid of seeming vain. I received an invitation to a workshop I'd dreamed of for years. I didn't tell him. I was afraid he'd mock my excitement. I started to disappear. I became a woman who filtered her dreams before sharing them, who thought 3 times before sharing good news, fearing a lukewarm or critical reaction, who cried in secret so as not to seem too emotional. I didn't want to cause trouble, not even exist too much. And when, by some slip, I forgot to police myself, the punishment was certain. One night, during dinner with his friends, I joked about how Liam took forever in the shower. Everyone laughed, including him. He seemed unbothered. But in the car, the atmosphere changed. Turned on the music but stayed silent. His fingers drummed the steering wheel with contained anger. My whole body tensed. When we got home, he said, "You need to learn to stand up for yourself. Have you noticed you always try to stand out by stepping on others? That's ugly." I tried to say it was just a joke, but he wouldn't listen. He said I needed to mature, that this was my last chance to grow emotionally before he lost patience completely. I cried in the bathroom, but silently, no sobs. With a towel in my mouth, because even my pain was inconvenient. The body also started to scream. The daily tensions turned into physical symptoms. I would wake up with a heavy chest, as if a brick was resting on it. My shoulders were always stiff. I suffered from gastritis attacks, tingling in my arms, and unexplained back pain. I went to the doctor. Tests came back normal. He asked if I was stressed. I remained silent. How do you explain a kind of stress that has no name? A weariness that doesn't come from a hectic life, but from a life where you have to hide inside yourself to survive? I began to doubt my sanity. Sometimes I thought, maybe I'm really overreacting. He doesn't yell, he doesn't cheat, he just pushes me to be better. Maybe the problem is me. And that maybe was a daily poison. Situations where he seemed kind, but Liam was a master at appearing like a prince to outsiders. He would bring me breakfast in bed on Sundays. He knew how to show affection at the right moments. Sometimes he would surprise me with flowers out of nowhere as a form of reward after a whole week of making me feel guilty for everything. It was like carefully calculated, positive reinforcement. Once I had an emotional breakdown. I was at home, crying in the bathroom, suffocated by an anxiety attack. I called him, desperate. I asked him to come. He didn't come. Hours later, he sent me a message. "I hope you've calmed down. The world doesn't revolve around your emotional breakdowns." And then, 2 days later, he showed up with chocolates, saying it was all fine, that I just needed to learn to handle my feelings better. This game of invalidation, followed by consolation, it made me emotionally addicted. I expected the punishment. Then, I craved the relief. It was like a drug. Friends started disappearing. My friends began to drift away. Some disappeared because I shut down. Others because Liam made subtle comments about them. Did you notice how Fernanda always seems to put you down? That friend of yours from college? Do you really think she wants what's best for you? At first, I doubted him. But over time, I began to believe. And without him needing to forbid anything, I isolated myself. Gradually, my world shrank to just him. And still, I walked on eggshells. I developed a chronic fear of causing trouble, of being a bother, of being too much, and at the same time, of not being enough. It was a constant paradox. If I talked too much, he accused me of being dramatic. If I spoke little, he accused me of shutting down and not trusting him. If I laughed, he said I was immature. If I cried, I was weak. If I disagreed, I was disrespectful. If I agreed, I was too passive. Nothing was enough, nothing was right. And so my solution was to be silent, shrink, disappear. When he realized I was almost fading away, he came closer, started saying he wanted to see me grow, that he wanted a strong partner who wouldn't be shaken by anything. He even encouraged me to go to therapy, but with a tone of disdain. Maybe then you'll finally stop being this fragile version of yourself. It was as if even my search for healing reflected some flaw in him. And the most ironic part? I believed he wanted what was best for me. It was during this phase that I truly began to hate myself. because I saw that I was unhappy. But still, I couldn't leave him, and that made me feel weak, stupid, addicted. I was afraid to say anything, and still thought the problem was me. I didn't end things with Liam because I was strong. I ended things because I was exhausted. It was as if my soul had been squeezed until nothing was left. That night, after another argument where he made me cry for 3 hours straight, and, in the end, forced me to apologize for making the atmosphere unbearable, I broke down. But, like every victim of emotional abuse, I still hesitated. Even after everything, I still wondered if I was the problem. I still thought maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I really was difficult. The breakup didn't happen with shouting or suitcases thrown on the street. It was silent, like the death of our relationship itself. I just stopped trying. One day, without warning, I went to my parents' house, took only a backpack with a change of clothes, said I needed to rest for a few days. Liam didn't call, didn't text, didn't show up. His silence was so deafening it made me realize he only cared when he could control me. And when he saw I didn't react to his distance, he activated another phase of abuse, post-breakup manipulation. First came the subtle messages. Are you okay? I miss you. I never thought you'd act so cold. Then he started messaging my friends, saying he was worried about me, that I was emotionally unstable, that I needed help. The cruelest twist? He started posting on social media phrases like, "Some people break your heart even when you just want to love." Mutual friends began questioning me. What did you do to Liam? And I shrank even more. It was like I couldn't prove the hell I lived through existed. There were no bruises, no photos, just me and my invisible pain. Liam didn't stop. When he saw the sweet messages didn't work, he turned to veiled threats. If you tell anyone what happened between us, know that I have messages from you that show something else. It was true. He always made me apologize for things he himself did. He could easily twist everything and make me look unstable, unbalanced, crazy. I began to develop panic attacks. The sound of a phone notification made me sweat. I kept looking over my shoulder, even in public places. It was as if he was still there, controlling my steps. The worst part? I felt guilty. Guilty for leaving him. Guilty for not trying harder. Guilty for maybe not being good enough. It was like I had been physically freed, but still emotionally chained. My mother noticed. One day, she saw me waking up crying on the couch, phone in hand. And that's when she said something that changed everything. "Daughter, when you talk about Liam, your whole body curls up, like you're expecting a slap. That's not love, that's trauma." She was the one who first took me to a support group for women who had been through abusive relationships. I was skeptical. I felt like an intruder. After all, I hadn't been hit. He never slapped me once. I had no marks. I wasn't a real victim. At least, that's what my conditioned mind told me. But in that group, I heard women tell stories so similar to mine that my whole body shook. One of them said, "He never hit me, but he made me feel like every word I said was a threat, like every gesture would be judged, like my love was never enough. And when I left, he made me feel like a monster." It was like hearing myself in another voice. That was the beginning of my awakening. I started therapy. It took time until I could tell everything. I was still ashamed. Ashamed for having allowed so much. Ashamed for having kept silent for so long. But my therapist taught me something essential. The silence of the victim is not consent. It is survival. And then came the most painful part, revisiting every moment of the relationship with the eyes of truth. I remembered how Liam isolated me, how he pushed away my best friend, saying she was a bad influence. I remembered how he picked on how I dressed, How he said my smile was too childish. How he laughed when I talked about some dream of mine. "You'll never get that," he said with that tone of contempt disguised as realism. Over time, I understood that I hadn't lived a loving relationship. I had lived an emotional battlefield, and I survived. I started to study more about psychological abuse, gaslighting, emotional manipulation, and I understood for the first time that what I suffered had a name, that what Liam did was systematic. It was a cruel game of control, disguised as a mature relationship. His messages continued for a while. He tried to confuse me, said he missed me, that he was willing to change. The same day, he sent messages saying I was ungrateful, that he had done everything for me. I even received an email with an old audio where I apologized for having overreacted in an argument. He used it as proof that I admitted to being the problem. That's when I did something that truly freed me. I blocked all his contacts, deleted all the conversations. But not to forget. It was to remind myself that I no longer deserved to torture myself trying to find logic in what was manipulation. I started to rebuild my life, little by little. Went out with friends again. Reconnected with my best friend, who cried when I apologized for pushing her away. I went back to studying, got involved in projects supporting other women, and one day I decided to tell my story. First, in a letter to myself, then in a closed group, and finally, out loud. That's when I realized my voice still trembled, but it was mine. Today, when I look back, I see that relationship almost erased my essence. But I also see that my soul, even fragmented, had the strength to scream. Even if silently, it fought to survive. Liam went on with his life. They say he got involved with another woman. I hope she sees before it's too late. But me? I finally stopped blaming myself. The fault was not mine. It never was. And if you also feel like you're walking on eggshells, if every word out of your mouth seems to trigger arguments, if you're afraid to be yourself, don't ignore that feeling. You're not overreacting, you're surviving. If this story echoed something inside you, if you too have wondered if you're exaggerating, if you're afraid to speak, to exist, know that you're not alone. Share your story here in the comments, or just say, I understand you. Let's create a space where silence is broken and guilt dissolved. And if you need help, seek psychological support or specialized groups. Your pain has a name, and your healing also has a path.